FORA.tv. The world is thinking.
I find inspiring about the way people have responded to the bailout is that there's been a lot of pattern recognition, right? Where immediately after Paulson unveiled the plan, people were comparing it to the Patriot Act, right? An economic version of the Patriot Act. Jon Stewart did that great segment where he cut together Bush's speech when he addressed the nation saying, if you don't give me $700 billion, you're all going to die, and basically doing the same thing where he said, if we don't go into Iraq, the same thing will happen, and it was almost an identical speech. What was so interesting is people trusted their instincts in that moment. They just said, this doesn't add up, buying $700 billion worth of bad debts, bringing it to Washington, we don't want to do it. And they were patronized. We were patronized in every major media outlet. People just didn't understand what a good and important plan this was and how trustworthy Henry Paulson was. He became like the Rudy Giuliani, saving the day. Never mind that when he was at Goldman Sachs, he was one of the key people, architects of these complicated financial instruments, and took Goldman Sachs's debt from $20 billion to $100 billion in 6 years. So he's going to be buying up his own bad debts. This is another thing that can't be said enough. I read that in Business Week. It's not controversial. The point is that people's original response was right, okay? And that was a real victory when Congress voted against that terrible bailout. No matter what the patronizing corporate media decided to say, that was a real victory. People were right, and now all the economists are saying that what they're starting to do, which is buy equity in the banks, is a much better plan, okay? So I thought that was a great example of shock resistance. Unfortunately, it was ignored by the Senate and then again by the Congress, and there was a real subversion of democracy in this country. It should have been left there. That should have been the end of the Paulson plan, and they should have started over, okay? What's happening now is that there was one good thing that happened in those negotiations, which is that Barney Frank and Chris Dodds managed to get a clause in there that gave the Treasury Secretary the ability to negotiate for equity in the banks. It didn't tell them he had to, but it gave them the ability. Then Gordon Brown negotiated that, and the European banks announced it, and it forced Paulson's hand to say, okay, we're going to do the same thing, okay? But they have not abandoned this terrible idea of buying up the toxic debts and handing out these crony contracts to administer it. They're just doing both. So they've got $700 billion, and we'll see if they increase that. Part of it's going to the equity buys, and part of it is continuing down this track. There's still an election, so politicians are still unusually receptive to your opinions. And I think it's really important to tell them that that original Paulson plan should just be abandoned wholesale now that it's been discredited by the market. Remember, the market did not think that was a good idea. The market plunged after the announcement of that plan. And the real focus should be on how to get a better deal in exchange for equity, because the deal that Paulson announced with the banks is a really bad deal. 5% return. Gordon Brown got 12. Okay, so one of the most striking things is this absurd narrative that's come out in the media that Paulson forced the hands of the banks, right? Made them take your money. There's something suspicious going on when 9 banks agree to a deal in an hour, in 1 hour, okay? And the reason for that is they couldn't have written a better deal themselves. And by the way, the lawyer advising the Treasury represents 7 of those 9 banks. So
you talk about
keep an eye on them.